The year 1941 was precisely the year when Reza Shah was on the verge of leaving, and Iran was about to be occupied by the Allied forces. On the fourth day of the most beautiful and dreamlike month of the year, in Varjavand Hospital in Tehran, Dr. Ghulam Hossein Mossadegh, the son of Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, welcomed the birth of a girl who would later become one of the leading figures in psychology in Iran and the world. The name of the girl was Homa. Homa was born as the embodiment of tolerance, forbearance, and coexistence, for she came into a family where her mother was Muslim and her father was Baha'i. The story of her parents' union is, in itself, quite fascinating.
It's very interesting the way my parents met. My father was doing his military services in a small town, Zahedan, and he was adjutant to General Taj Bakhsh. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was serving there as kind of like a governor of the area of Baluchistan and Zahedan. Interestingly enough, these two people, the governor and the general, became friends, and therefore they would go to each other's home. In those days, people who were adjutant to a general would also accompany him. During these meetings, my father and mother saw each other, and they started, flirting with each other in their own conservative way. And then my father started writing to my mother, and my cousin, Dr. Homa Mahmoudi, who was head of television and variety of other jobs he had later in his life, became the guy who would carry these letters from these two lovers. I have those letters, interestingly enough, that my mother kept them very dear to her heart. And when we came to the United States, despite the fact that we had very limited amount of room for the luggage, she brought that box. My mother's grandfather was Hamid Dole, who was very interested in my father. He loved what he stood for. My father spoke French and English because while he was living in Zahedan, there were French people running the customs office, and there were British and people from India that spoke English. He was very bright and very interested in learning. The reason my parents got married was because my mother's grandfather said, "I want this young man in my family."
Homa spent the early years of her childhood in the city of Karaj. Her father was an employee of the Ministry of Agriculture and worked at the College of Agriculture in the same city. At the same time, he also worked as an interpreter alongside American advisors who had come to Iran during the Second Pahlavi era to implement plans for the advancement of agriculture. After a few years, Homa's family moved to Tehran, first settling in the Olhak neighborhood and later in Zargande. By the time Homa was ready to start school, there was no better place than Jeanne d'Arc School on Lalezar Street, where she began her studies. Jeanne d'Arc School was one of the schools established by the French in Iran. It was in a school with such a prestigious reputation that Homa began her education. Farah Pahlavi also studied at this school.
بازدید اولیا حضرت فرح پهلوی ملکه ایران از دبیرستان ژاندارک تهران که معظم الدها در آن تحصیل کردند.
Homa was in the 9th grade when she left Jeanne d'Arc school. This was because her father was deeply keen on his children continuing their education outside of Iran. Initially, he tried to arrange for the family to migrate to Indonesia, but it did not work out. Eventually, due to her father's familiarity with the United States and the state of Utah, where he had previously traveled on scholarships from the Ministry of Agriculture and was acquainted with the environment, they decided to immigrate to America. And in 1958, Homa and her family first traveled from Iran to England. From there, they boarded the SS United States ship from the port of Southampton and, after a 4-day journey, arrived at the port of New York.
My father was really a very conservative, not a man of adventure at all. And for him to decide to take a family of basically 5 to United States was really a very courageous act. We came through several countries and then by SS United States to the United States and Logan, Utah, which was a small farming town. I was very much appalled to see the high schools in the United States, and of course it was a farm town, they were wild kids, and the girls would get married in high school, and I had ambitions of, becoming a plastic surgeon and a doctor and a variety of other things. My father talked to the Dean of Women, and at that time we had Dean of Women and Dean of Men, and said to her that my daughter has a hard time adjusting to our move, and she doesn't want to go to high school. Could she come and stay in college? Could she take like English classes? Well, you couldn't attend classes if you were not admitted to university. The Dean of Women decided to interview me and to see how much I knew. I knew French well, and the head of department of French was very impressed. And I knew math. My math and chemistry was way above others in our school in Iran. In fact, I was nicknamed Madame Curie in my class. So when they saw my scores, they said, okay, she can come conditionally for a year. If she gets good grades and can adopt and take English classes, we'll keep her.
The university had provided Homa's father with 2 student rooms. One of them was occupied by Homa's parents, and the other was shared by the 3 children: Homa, her sister Hoda, and her brother Masoud.
Once I entered university, I was just in 7th heaven. I was so excited that I am in university, I'm expected to be in 10th grade, and really memorized every book I could. And also, my teachers were very good. They really appreciated me. They really appreciated my efforts. And I was able to excel and take a lot more courses than usually it is expected of students to take. I was mostly taking 18 hours every quarter. So I was able to move fast through college. From the fear that my father is going to go back to Iran and I have to go sit in 10th grade. So after he renewed his contract for another year, which made us stay in Logan for 3 years, at the end of the 3rd year, I graduated from university. So I had at least my bachelor's degree and I was safe. My bachelor's degree was in French, minor Spanish, and I also had my teaching certificate to be able to teach high school students. And I also could teach French anywhere. Right after I graduated from university, I decided to go to Salt Lake City, Utah, at the University of Utah, where my father was also transferring to study sociology and get his PhD in sociology, to get my master's in French literature and minor in Arabic studies. And I have a certificate in Middle Eastern and Arabic studies from University of Utah and a master's degree in French literature. And my master's thesis was influence of Arabic poetry, which was based on Persian poetry, through Spain, through the Moors that went to Spain in 12th century, on French troubadours, and later on Shakespeare.
Homa was 22 years old when she earned her master's degree in French literature and moved to California to work at a private school in the city of Pomona. There, she was supposed to teach French to wealthy American children. This was the first time in her life that she was separating from her family and experiencing independence. On her first day of work, Homa encountered a scene she never expected to see.
First time I'm away from family, it was very scary. I had an apartment. I lived in this apartment that was near my school, and then taught for a year. It was the time that the hippies were coming, and the students were very interested in who am I, and they were talking about spiritual values rather than more of a values of money and success and all of the other things. The Beatles had just started singing. They were talking about going to Maharishis in India, and being the only woman that was from Iran, they thought Iran, India, all of us are spiritual beings that are coming from that area of the world. So I found myself not teaching French, but answering these students about life, and I went really more on Baha'i principles because that's what I knew about unity of mankind, how to have more modern values of equality, justice, and a connection with a higher being.
Well, she was just 17, you know what I mean, and the way she looked was way beyond compare. So how could I dance with another?
And this became the spark that ignited the new direction of Homa's life. So, after a year, she packed her bags again and headed back to Utah, this time to study psychology.
First class that I took was all men, because in those days psychology was a male profession. And one of the students who had just come from New York, and he was an arrogant New Yorker, came to me and said, "What are you doing in this class?" I said, "I want to study psychology." He said, "Women study social work and men study psychology." You know, something, that day, I never forget that day, something in me really changed. And I said, "I will show you." I never was competitive, so, I was mostly dancing to my own tunes. I decided, I'm going to become a psychologist. And it's almost like I bet him that I'll show you. And I started studying psychology, testing, clinical work, and was very happy with my career. I received my PhD from University of Utah and married that guy who challenged me and came to Los Angeles.
Following her time in Los Angeles, Homa met an individual who proposed a collaboration with their research team on a significant project.
He came to me and said, "You know what? we have a $5 million grant to develop psychological tests for police officers. And I am interested in talking to you and hiring you maybe. Would you come to my office tomorrow? And I went to his office the next day. He was a wonderful man, Dr. Felton. And he had this grant to be able to psychologically evaluate police officers, but we had no tests and we had no previous data on that. And he said, you know, I'm hiring you because you are a woman from Middle East and you don't hate cops and you don't have an agenda. You know, you were raised in Utah and you really don't know to love police officer or hate him. And when I told him I'm a Baha'i and I don't even get involved in politics, he said, so much better, because at this time, most students are either pro-Vietnam or anti-Vietnam War. And many of the policemen that come back are Vietnam veterans that become police officers. We want to know which one of these guys will be successful, which one would be violent for the society, and this is who I want to work on this project. And he also hired another woman that came from a very small town in Texas. So the two of us started this project. I tested 500 police officers in Los Angeles, mostly sheriff, and we were able to develop standards for selection of police officers nationally. There was an element of both very masculine and it was very aggressive and guns and killing, and it wasn't me. After I finished the project and Jason was born, my son, in 1972, I left that project and it was finished. And I decided I had many offers to work with police departments and be the head of their psychology. It wasn't me.
Subsequently, Homa joined UCLA, one of the most prestigious universities in the US and globally.
In 1972, we purchased this house because Jason was born and we needed to move out of the apartment we had. 3 houses above us was a woman that worked at UCLA Department of Psychiatry, had a very large project called Family Styles Project. We were studying hippie families, normal, regular husband and wife families, and people who lived in communes. How are they going to raise their children in this new atmosphere in those days?
During these years, Iran was moving toward progress, and the economic situation was very favorable due to the rise in oil prices. Many large companies were encouraged to go to Iran, which approached Homa and asked her to evaluate the personnel they were sending to Iran.
In 1974, I was not only interested in going into Iran, but for 2 years prior to that, I was training different companies, Fortune 400, 500 companies in Southern California, who were sending executives to Iran to work with the government, with military, and variety of other programs, and training their families in culture shock, teaching them Persian, teaching them about psychological difficulties that they might have in Iran and how to deal with it.
After years of being away from her homeland, Homa finally had the opportunity to travel to Iran with her husband and her son, Jason.
In 1973, Iran approached UCLA to have programs and exchange programs with different departments at UCLA. What happened was that the president of university and the vice president, Dr. Svensson, were interested in giving a response to Iran because they received several letters to have an exchange with the medical school, with the art school, with the management school, and School of Education. So I was the only Iranian woman at UCLA. Dr. Banani had been there for many years, and he was in Middle East studies and Persian, and he wasn't interested in working with Iran in this project. So what we did was when the president asked me, would you like to go to Iran and see what they want from us, I was delighted. I had not been to Iran came in 59, and this is 74, so it is like 15 years.
Eagerly longing to see Iran again, this time she traveled as a representative of UCLA. That trip marked the beginning of academic collaborations between UCLA and Iranian universities.
I had a wonderful time. It was a new place. We met with a lot of Iranians who were Minister of Rehabilitation, Dr. Sheikh al-Islam Zadeh, and a variety of other people to see what they wanted from UCLA.
One of the projects that was carried out was a higher education program that replicated the educational initiatives being implemented in the US and California. This golden and exciting period lasted for about 2 years, until 1977, when due to the social conditions in Iran, which were moving toward revolution, these activities came to a halt.
Then what happened was Iranians were coming to Los Angeles in droves. Most of them, after the revolution, were very damaged. The children were having culture shock. They had to change school. Some of them had just uprooted and come. A lot of Baha'is came here. A lot of Jewish families came. So head of Department of Psychiatry at Cedars-Sinai Hospital asked a friend of mine to come and offer me a job to go to Cedars because they needed a psychologist who spoke Persian. And at that time, I was the only one.
Homa dedicated a significant portion of her time and life to helping Iranian immigrants who had recently migrated to America due to the revolution. She assisted them in adapting to the new society and coping with the challenges of migration. These efforts continue to this day, and many Iranians have benefited and continue to benefit from Homa's support. In the 1980s and 1990s, Homa spent most of her time traveling abroad, delivering lectures and teaching at various conferences and universities around the world. She now devoted most of her time to activities focused on women's issues and promoting global peace. As a result, she traveled extensively, meeting and engaging in discussions with women from other countries. One might ask, what has motivated her to lead such a life of service to her fellow man? Perhaps this question is best answered by Homa herself.
Many women still are under the influence of men, meaning that they are obedient to the men in their life, their husband, their grandfather, their father, their uncle, their boss, and they see themselves, their own value, their own potential through an older person or a male person. My mother has told me that our family is not good in doing math. My grandmother has said that the daughters of our family are badbachters and you know, they are not able to do something. Those voices are very, very dangerous, and women tend to hold to those voices and stop themselves from growth and development. Also, the women have more tendency of stopping after the first unhappiness, after the first loss, after the first disappointment. And I think they need to learn to get up, shake the dirt off of themselves, and move on. Few women do this. And I think more and more, if women learn that there's going to be a lot of roadblocks in lives, and we need to either jump over them, go around them, or break them. And that is good and normal, and it's feminine. Then they would learn to move on better in their life and career, and after they get married or whatever. I'm very much not only in favor of, but I think it's a must for women to be educated and have a career of anything they can do. Whatever the potential is, they have to move on. But to have a skill, for a woman to have some form of a skill is extremely, extremely important. And I really believe the more women get involved in affairs of the society, we will have a better society. The more women are educated, they would raise better children. They would not be afraid of what's happening in the world. And they would not be so dependent on their evening meal and the roof over their head, that they can see themselves that, okay, if my husband dies, I am able to do something. If I don't get married, I'm able to do something in this world. So, number one is education. But even deeper than that is the confidence, the self-confidence that I can take care of myself. I am able not only to take care of myself, but to take care of many. I have that capacity, and I have that capability, or I will challenge myself and get it.